You know, when you think about the great Achaemenid Persian Empire, what comes to mind is just the scale of it all. It was the largest empire the world had ever seen up to that point. And at its heart was this magnificent capital, Persepolis, a city of absolutely colossal palaces and incredible art, the center of a power that stretched all the way from the Balkans to India.
But all that grandeur, it begs a really big question, right? How did you actually run a thing like that? How did Darius the Great, way back in the late 6th century BC, handle the logistics, the payments, the supplies for this whole sprawling imperial machine? I mean, the big fancy inscriptions? They tell us all about the king's glory, but they don't tell us about the nuts and bolts of how things got done.
Well, it turns out the answer was literally buried in the mud and rubble of Persepolis itself, just waiting for someone to find it. And this is where our story really becomes an archaeological detective case. And it doesn't start in some grand throne room, but out in the city's fortifications.
So picture this. It's the spring of 1933, and an archaeologist, a guy named Ernst Hertzfeld, is overseeing work at Persepolis. His team is just leveling some debris to build a road, pretty routine stuff, when they hit something completely unexpected. Not gold, not statues, but thousands and thousands of baked clay tablets.
And we're not talking a few, we're talking an estimated 30,000 tablets and fragments. Now, this wasn't a royal library full of epic poems. Nope. What Hertzfeld had stumbled upon were the empire's lost filing cabinets, an administrative archive that documented the day-to-day economic life of the entire Persian heartland.
When you start to break it down, you see this complex, multilingual bureaucracy at work. So the vast majority of the texts were written in Elamite, which was kind of the local administrative language. But what's fascinating is that about a quarter of these documents had no text at all, just an image, and then a small fraction were in Aramaic. It paints this picture of a really diverse system.
So how in the world do you read a document that has no words on it? Well, the key was literally pressed right into the clay. The archive preserved thousands of unique seal impressions, the tiny, intricate fingerprints of the Achaemenid administration.
So these things are called glyptic seals, and they are basically these miniature works of art, usually carved from stone, that an individual would own. When you rolled or stamped one onto wet clay, it left behind this unique image that functioned just like an official signature does for us today, verifying and authorizing the whole transaction.
And the process itself? Super simple, but really effective. Let's say a group of workers needs their monthly grain ration. Okay, so a scribe writes down the transaction, forms a little clay tablet around a knotted string, and then the official in charge of the supplies rolls their personal cylinder seal across the clay. That impression right there authorizes the payment. The tablet is the receipt. Done.
So you gotta understand, these tiny little images held immense power. They were legally binding marks of identity and authority. Everything from wine deliveries for a state banquet to flour rations for the construction workers. Every single one of those transactions was authorized by one of these miniature masterpieces.
But here's where it gets really cool. These seals are so much more than just a signature. They open up this incredible window into a vibrant visual world. I mean, with over 3,400 distinct seals identified so far, they show us the art, the myths, and the ideas that were bubbling up just beneath the surface of the king's official monuments. Okay, so the most popular theme by a long shot is what we call the heroic encounter. You see these powerful, idealized heroes wrestling with lions, griffins, and winged bulls. These are all scenes about control and domination, projecting strength and order over the forces of chaos.
Then you've got another huge theme, the royal hunt. But these aren't just calm, simple hunting scenes. No way. You see these archers in these super dynamic, running poses, firing arrows at both real and fantastical creatures. This kind of imagery was a huge part of royal ideology, showing the king and his nobles as the absolute masters of the wild.
And oh my gosh, the beasts themselves are just incredible. The seals are crawling with these fantastic creatures. You've got winged, human-headed lions, powerful scorpion men, and all sorts of other hybrids. It's brilliant, and it shows us this really rich mythology that was just firing up the Persian imagination.
And finally, and this is a big one, some of these seals give us this incredibly rare glimpse into their religious life. We see worshippers standing in front of these mysterious structures, and sometimes there's a figure in a winged ring floating above them. These scenes give us clues about the actual rituals and beliefs of people in the Persian heartland, away from the official state religion that was so focused on the king.
But, these scenes also throw a huge challenge at historians. How do we actually decode these ancient images? So, let's dive into a real academic debate that's going on right now, all about those mysterious structures we just saw in the ritual scenes. See, for years, pretty much everyone just assumed these stepped structures were literal pictures of Zoroastrian fire altars. Makes sense, right? But the sheer variety of them and the strange context they appear in on the Persepolis seals made some researchers start to ask, are we just looking at a simple picture here, or could this be a symbol for something much, much bigger?
Okay, to really get this debate, we have to talk for a second about how images even work. An icon is pretty straightforward. It's a picture that looks like the thing it represents. A picture of a fire altar is an icon of a fire altar. But a symbol is different. Its meaning is based on a shared cultural agreement. Think of a peace sign. It doesn't look like peace, but we all agree on what it represents.
And this is where leading scholars now argue that these structures are really functioning as powerful signs. As historian Mark Garrison puts it, their meaning doesn't come from being a literal drawing, but from their ability to convey meaning by association. That maybe they represent the whole idea of ritual itself, or even the very presence of the divine.
All right, so let's pull back and tie all of this together. We've gone from this massive empire to a dusty archive, to these tiny little fingerprints, to decoding some pretty complex symbols. What does it all tell us about the Achaemenid Persians?
Well, these tiny seals reveal a huge amount. They show us this really complex bureaucracy with specific officials, like regional directors and supply officers, each with their own unique seal. They reveal a visual culture full of myths and symbols that was way more diverse than the official art. And maybe most importantly, they give us a bottom-up view of the empire. Not just what the king wanted us to see, but how the system actually worked, day in and day out.
Because look, at the end of the day, those grand reliefs at Persepolis and the big royal inscriptions, that's propaganda. They tell one story. But these tablets, authenticated by thousands of tiny seal impressions, they tell the stories the great kings left out, the stories of the accountants, the storehouse managers, and the workers who actually made the empire run.
And maybe the most exciting part of this whole story is that it's not over, not by a long shot. Of the tens of thousands of documents they found back in 1933, a huge number of them are still unstudied, just sitting in museum drawers. So it just leaves you wondering, what other secrets about one of history's greatest empires are still waiting to be unlocked from these tiny fingerprints of the past?